Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw-dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that, though, and let the drama begin.
You wrecked everything I was. Now watch me bury what you loved. One shovel at a time, just like you did to me.
The knock on my office door came at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would split my life into before and after. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the clock, counting minutes until I could escape the suffocating admin building of Millbrook College. "Come in," I called, not looking up from the budget spreadsheet that had been mocking me for hours. A thin kid with dark hair shuffled in, clutching a backpack like it contained nuclear codes. Miguel something. I'd seen him around campus, but never spoken to him directly. He had that look, smart, but invisible, the kind of student who knew things. Mr. Lang," his voice cracked slightly. "I have something for you." He placed a USB stick on my desk with the reverence of someone delivering evidence to the FBI. No words, just a knowing smirk that made my stomach twist. "What is this?" I asked. But he was already backing toward the door. "You'll know when you see it." The door clicked shut, leaving me alone with the innocuous piece of plastic that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. I should have thrown it away. Should have deleted whatever digital poison it contained without looking. But after 13 years of marriage to Jenna, after watching her grow more distant, more secretive, more cruel in her casual dismissals of my existence, curiosity won. The video file opened with the timestamp from last Thursday. The angle suggested a hidden camera, maybe in a bookshelf. The location was immediately recognizable: Jenna's office in the English department with its pretentious motivational posters and towers of ungraded papers. My wife appeared in frame, but she wasn't alone. Toby Miles sprawled in the chair across from her desk, 18 years old and radiating the kind of cocky confidence that comes from never facing real consequences. He was handsome in that generic way that made middle-aged women lose their minds. Square jaw, athletic build, the kind of smile that promised trouble. "Did you take care of it?" Jenna asked, her voice carrying that sultry tone I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Professor Lang, you worry too much," Toby replied, standing and moving around the desk. "Your husband's not going to figure anything out. He's too busy being invisible." They laughed together, and the sound hit me like a physical blow. What followed next made me slam the laptop shut so hard the screen cracked. My hands shook as bile rose in my throat. I stumbled to the small bathroom attached to my office and vomited until nothing was left but burning acid. When I returned to my desk, the laptop sat there like an unexploded bomb. I opened it again, steeling myself for what I knew I'd see. The video continued for another 12 minutes. I watched all of it, documenting every touch, every whispered word, every moment that confirmed what some part of me had suspected for months. When Jenna called Toby her secret weapon while adjusting her blouse, I felt something fundamental break inside me. The video ended with them discussing Toby's grade in her advanced composition class. "A plus, as promised," Jenna said, her hand trailing down his chest. "You've certainly earned it." I sat in my office until well past 6, staring at the black screen and feeling the careful architecture of my life crumble around me. 13 years of marriage, 5 years of trying for children that never came. Countless faculty dinners where I smiled and nodded while Jenna charmed everyone with her wit and intelligence, never mentioning that her husband existed in any meaningful way. The drive home was a blur of rage and numbness. I found Jenna in our kitchen, grading papers with a glass of wine at her elbow, looking every inch the dedicated professor. Beautiful, brilliant, accomplished, and rotten to the core. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," I managed. "Yours?" "The usual. Student conferences, department meeting, nothing exciting." The lie came so easily, delivered with such casual indifference that I almost admired her skill. Almost. That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe and planning my next move. The old Derek would have confronted her immediately, demanding explanations and probably ending up apologizing for invading her privacy. But that version of me had died at 3:47 p.m. in my office. The new me understood that information was power, and I'd barely scratched the surface of what I needed to know. The student information system at Millbrook was laughably insecure, a relic from the early 2000s that ran on the digital equivalent of duct tape and prayer. As an administrator, I had access to academic records, grade histories, and enrollment data going back 15 years. Toby Miles had taken 3 classes with my wife over the past 2 semesters. His grades told an interesting story. D+ in Introduction to Literature with Professor Hartwell, C- in Creative Writing with Professor Chen, and a perfect A in Advanced Composition with Professor Jenna Lang. The grade change logs were even more revealing. Toby's initial grade in Jenna's class had been entered as a C+ on May 15th. On May 18th, it was changed to an A. The modification was made at 11:23 p.m. using Jenna's faculty login. I cross-referenced the date with our text messages. May 18th was the night Jenna claimed she was working late on departmental reviews. She'd come home after midnight, smelling of wine and making excuses about a faculty dinner that had run long. But the real revelation came when I dug into Toby's disciplinary record. 3 complaints filed against him over the past year: inappropriate behavior toward female students, suspected cheating on exams, and a hazing incident that had been mysteriously dropped without investigation. Each complaint had been handled by the same administrator, Chairman Walter Bigsby. Bigsby was old-school academia, the kind of man who still wore tweed jackets unironically, and believed tenure made him untouchable. He'd been running the English department for 12 years, long enough to develop the God complex that came with unchecked power over younger faculty members. I'd always found him creepy, the way his eyes lingered too long on female students and colleagues. Now I wondered if Jenna had fallen victim to his particular brand of mentorship, or if she was a willing participant in whatever game they were playing. The next morning, I installed a digital voice recorder in Jenna's office. It took me 3 trips to get the timing right, slipping in during lunch breaks and evening hours when the building was mostly empty. The device was smaller than a matchbox and magnetic, designed to stick to the underside of metal filing cabinets without detection. I told myself I was gathering evidence for a divorce lawyer, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I wanted to understand the full scope of their betrayal, to map every lie and deception before deciding how to respond. The first few recordings were mundane: student conferences, phone calls with publishers about textbook adoptions, complaints about administrative policies. But on Thursday afternoon, I struck gold. "Walter, it's me!" Jenna's voice came through the small speaker in my office as I played back the day's recordings. "We need to talk about the Miles situation." "I told you that's been handled," came the gruff response. Chairman Bigsby, though the voice quality made it clear he was on speakerphone. The family received a very generous settlement to keep quiet about last year's incident. "That's not what I'm worried about," Jenna said. "Toby's getting careless. Yesterday, he practically groped me in the hallway where anyone could see." Bigsby chuckled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Young men rarely understand discretion, but he serves his purpose, doesn't he? And his father's donations have been quite helpful for the department." "His purpose?" Jenna's voice sharpened. "Walter, I'm not some kind of— Of course not, my dear. You're a brilliant educator who understands that academia requires certain compromises, just like I understood when you needed help with that plagiarism issue last spring." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Jenna spoke again, her voice was smaller, defeated. That was different. The student had actually plagiarized the work. Had he? The evidence was rather thin, as I recall. But you needed tenure, and I needed your cooperation on the curriculum restructuring. Everyone got what they wanted. And now? Now you continue to be the exceptional professor you've always been. Toby graduates in May, his father writes another check, and we all move on with our lives. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to explain to the tenure committee why you've been altering grades for personal reasons. The conversation ended there, but I sat listening to the silence for several minutes, processing what I'd just heard. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was being blackmailed into it. But instead of sympathy, I felt only cold rage at how easily she'd sacrificed her integrity and our marriage to advance her career. That evening, Jenna came home with flowers and wine, suggesting we have dinner at the Italian place where we'd had our first date. She was trying to reconnect, probably feeling guilty about her extracurricular activities. "You seem different lately," she said over candlelit pasta, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Distant. Work stress, I replied, letting her fingers intertwine with mine while my mind calculated angles and possibilities. Budget cuts, staff reductions, the usual administrative nightmare. She nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the supportive wife with Oscar-worthy conviction. I know I haven't been the best partner lately either. The tenure pressure, the committee work, it's been overwhelming. We'll get through it, I said, and meant it, though not in the way she imagined. The old Derek would have been grateful for this moment of intimacy, would have convinced himself that whatever problems existed could be solved through better communication and couples therapy. But the new Derek understood that some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. I was done being invisible. Time to make myself very, very seen. Miguel found me in the parking lot 3 days later, materializing from behind a van like some kind of information dealer from a spy movie. Kid had a talent for dramatic timing. "You watch it?" he asked without preamble. "I watched it," I confirmed. "Question is, what do you want?" He shrugged, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Justice, I guess. Tired of watching rich kids buy their way through school while people like me grind for every point." "How many others have you recorded?" "Enough." His smile was sharp. "Professor Lang ain't the only one with flexible grading policies, if you know what I mean." I studied his face, seeing something of myself in the quiet anger behind his eyes. Miguel was invisible too, just another scholarship kid from the wrong side of town navigating a world designed to exclude him. But unlike me, he'd armed himself with cameras and cunning. "I need more," I said. "Everything you have on Chairman Bigsby? That'll cost extra." I handed him $500 in cash, more money than most students saw in a month. His eyes widened, but he pocketed it smoothly. "Faculty mixers tomorrow night," he said. "Big fundraising event in the president's house. Security cameras everywhere, but I know some blind spots. Get me what you can." The faculty mixer was an annual tradition, a chance for donors and board members to mingle with professors over expensive wine and congratulate themselves on supporting higher education. Jenna had been looking forward to it for weeks, buying a new dress and making appointments for hair and nails. I watched her get ready that evening, applying makeup with the careful precision of someone preparing for war. She looked stunning, sophisticated, elegant, every inch the accomplished academic. It would be one of the last times I'd see her like this, confident and untouchable. "You're sure you don't want to come?" she asked, though we both knew she preferred attending these events alone. I was a reminder of her practical side, the administrator husband who handled mundane details while she soared in intellectual circles. "Budget reports to finish," I said. "You have fun." She kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark I didn't bother to wipe away until her car disappeared down our street. The videos Miguel delivered the next morning were worth every penny. 12 minutes of high-definition footage showing Chairman Bigsby and my wife in a corner of the president's study, their conversation intense and intimate. The audio was perfect. "The board is asking questions about grade inflation," Bigsby was saying, his hand resting possessively on Jenna's lower back. "Nothing serious yet, but we need to be more careful." "About Toby." Jenna leaned closer, her voice barely audible above the party noise. "About all of it. The donations, the grade changes, the complaints that keep disappearing." His fingers traced along her spine. "You've been sloppy, my dear. Passion makes people careless." I never wanted this to get so complicated. But it has, hasn't it? And now we're in it together. He pulled her against him, and she didn't resist when he kissed her neck. "Don't worry. I've been protecting faculty members like you for years. As long as you continue to be reasonable." The threat hung unspoken between them, clear as daylight to anyone watching. Jenna closed her eyes and nodded, accepting her fate with the resignation of someone who'd stopped fighting long ago. I watched the footage 5 times, memorizing every gesture and inflection. Then I began making copies, lots of them. The anonymous email went out at 6 a.m. the next morning, sent from a disposable account through a VPN to every member of the Board of Trustees, the student newspaper editorial board, and 3 local reporters who covered education issues. The subject line was simple: academic integrity, concerns at Millbrook College. The message contained no text, just the video file and a timestamp showing when it was recorded. By 10 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters and board members. By noon, Chairman Bigsby had called an emergency department meeting. By 2 p.m., campus security was escorting Jenna out of her classroom while students filmed everything on their phones. I watched it all unfold from my office window, sipping coffee and feeling something dark and satisfied uncurl in my chest. The old Derek would have felt guilty about destroying his wife's career. The new Derek felt only the cold pleasure of a chess master watching his opponent realize they'd walked into checkmate. Jenna called me 17 times that afternoon. I let every call go to voicemail, listening to her voice grow more frantic with each message. Derek, something horrible has happened. Someone filmed me and Walter at the mixer, and now they're saying, please pick up. I need you right now. I know how this looks, but it's not what... Where are you? Why aren't you answering? The reporters are outside our house, and I don't know what to... The final message came at 6:15 p.m. I know it was you. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to them again. When I finally drove home that evening, I found Jenna sitting on our front steps, still wearing the same clothes from the morning. Her makeup had smeared, her hair was disheveled, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her exposed secrets. Why? She asked as I walked up the driveway. Why what? I unlocked the front door, stepping inside without helping her up. She followed me into the kitchen where I methodically began preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. Don't play games with me, Derek. I know you sent that video. I don't know what you're talking about. I opened a can of soup and poured it into a pot. The domestic routine absurdly normal given the circumstances. The board suspended me pending investigation. Walter's been placed on administrative leave. They're talking about criminal charges. Her voice cracked. My career is over. That's unfortunate. I stirred the soup, not looking at her. But I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do. She grabbed my arm, forcing me to face her. Derek, please, I know I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? The word came out harder than I'd intended. Sleeping with your student was a mistake? Changing his grades was a mistake? Lying to me for months was a mistake? Her face went white. How did you... Know about Toby? About the grade changes? About all of it? I pulled free from her grip. Because unlike you, I'm actually good at my job. And unlike Bigsby, I don't need to blackmail people to get what I want. The truth hung between us like a live wire. Jenna's composure finally cracked, and she started crying. Ugly, desperate sobs that might have moved me once upon a time. I never wanted to hurt you, she said through tears. Walter threatened my tenure, said he'd ruin my career if I didn't. So you chose to ruin our marriage instead. I thought I could handle it. I thought it would be temporary, just until I got tenure and could transfer to another department. But then Toby started demanding more, and Walter kept pushing, and I got in so deep I couldn't find a way out. I turned off the stove and faced her fully for the first time in hours. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack a bag and leave tonight. Find a hotel, stay with a friend, I don't care. But you're not sleeping in my house anymore. Derek, I'll file for divorce next week. You can keep whatever money you have in your personal accounts, but everything else stays here. The house, the cars, the investment accounts, all of it. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, looking pathetic and lost. Where am I supposed to go? My reputation is destroyed. No college will hire me now? That's not my problem anymore. As she stumbled upstairs to pack, I returned to stirring my soup and planning the next phase. The video had been just the opening move, designed to flush out other players and gauge their responses. Now that I understood the full scope of the corruption, it was time to burn it all down. But first, I had a phone call to make. Miguel? It's Derek Lang. How would you like to make another $5,000? The student protests started 2 days after the video leaked, organized by a coalition of academic integrity advocates and feminist groups who saw Jenna's situation as evidence of systemic misuse. They set up tents on the quad, demanding transparency from the administration and the resignation of all faculty members involved in grade manipulation. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly feeding information to the protest organizers through anonymous tips, providing them with carefully curated evidence that painted Jenna as both perpetrator and victim. The narrative was complex enough to generate maximum outrage while keeping the focus on institutional corruption rather than personal vendettas. Chairman Bigsby tried to control the damage through traditional academic channels, closed-door meetings, carefully worded statements, and pressure on board members to weather the storm. But he'd underestimated how thoroughly I'd documented his operation. The second video drop came during the emergency board meeting called to address the crisis. Miguel had outdone himself, capturing footage of Bigsby in his office, counting cash from a manila envelope while on the phone with someone discussing the usual arrangement for problem students. The audio was crystal clear. Parents pay for cleanup. Kid gets a clean record, everyone moves on. It's worked for 15 years, and it'll work for 15 more. By evening, 3 board members had called for Bigsby's immediate termination. By morning, the local district attorney had announced a formal investigation into bribery and corruption at Millbrook College. I watched it all unfold from my office, fielding increasingly frantic calls from reporters who'd discovered my connection to the scandal. My responses were perfect, measured, professional, appropriately shocked by my wife's behavior. I had no idea about any of this, I told the education reporter from the Daily Herald. Jenna and I kept our professional lives separate. I'm as devastated as anyone to learn what was happening in her department. The quote ran in the next day's front page story, accompanied by a photo of me looking appropriately haggard outside the administration building. The narrative was taking shape exactly as I'd planned. Derek Lang, the dedicated administrator blindsided by his wife's corruption, struggling to maintain the college's integrity, while his personal life crumbled. Jenna, meanwhile, had moved in with her sister across town and hired a lawyer who specialized in academic misconduct cases. She'd been calling me constantly, alternating between threats and pleas for reconciliation. "I know you're behind this," she said during one late-night call I actually answered. "The timing, the videos, all of it. You're systematically destroying my life." "Your life destroyed itself," I replied. "I'm just making sure everyone else can see what I've been living with. Derek, please, whatever you want, money, the house, an apology, just name it. But stop this before it goes any further." It's already gone further. Much further. The next morning brought news that Toby Miles had been arrested on campus, charged with sexual attack based on a complaint filed by another student, a complaint that had been buried in Bigsby's files for 8 months. The victim, emboldened by the media attention, had come forward with detailed allegations and corroborating evidence. I'd found the complaint while searching through Bigsby's office files during a late-night security check of the building. The victim's statement was damning, describing a pattern of predatory behavior that the administration had actively covered up to protect a major donor's son. Anonymous tips to the victim and her family had encouraged them to contact both the police and a victim's rights attorney. The case was airtight, and Toby's expensive lawyers couldn't make it disappear like his previous infractions. Jenna called me sobbing after the arrest was announced. "They're saying I enabled him," she cried, "that I helped cover up sexual attack by changing his grades and keeping him in school." "Did you? I didn't know." Walter never told me about the other complaints. I thought it was just about the grades, not... She broke off, probably realizing how that sounded. "Not about our ape? Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like the truth?" The conversation ended there, but I knew she was beginning to understand the scope of what she'd been part of. The grade changes weren't just academic fraud. They were part of a system that protected predators and silenced victims in exchange for donor money. Miguel found me in the parking lot that afternoon, his usual dramatic timing intact. "Toby's lawyer is talking about plea deals," he said without preamble. "Word is he's willing to testify against other people to reduce his sentence." Other people, meaning faculty members who knew about the complaints, administrators who buried evidence, people who took money to look the other way. His smile was sharp. "Your wife's name is on a lot of documents." I handed him another envelope of cash. "What else do you have?" "Financial records showing payments from the Miles family to a consulting company owned by Bigsby's wife." Bank statements from faculty members who suddenly got very generous salary supplements around the same time certain problems disappeared. Email chains between Bigsby and board members discussing reputation management. "How did you get all this?" Miguel shrugged. "Rich people think they're smart, but they're lazy about computer security." Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. That evening, I sat in my empty house. Jenna had taken most of her belongings during the day while I was at work, and reviewed the evidence Miguel had provided. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined, involving millions of dollars in hush money and cover-ups, spanning more than a decade. My wife wasn't just a victim of blackmail. She was a willing participant in a system that prioritized money over justice, prestige over truth. The affairs, the grade changes, the destroyed complaints, all of it was connected and all of it was documented. I made copies of everything, organizing the files by type and severity. Some would go to law enforcement, others to investigative journalists, still others to federal agencies that handled educational fraud. But not yet. First, I wanted to see how far Jenna and Bigsby would go to protect themselves when they realized the true scope of what I knew. The phone rang at midnight. Bigsby's voice was slurred with alcohol and desperation. Lang, we need to talk. About what? About ending this before it destroys all of us. Meet me tomorrow night. Parking garage behind the Marriott downtown. Come alone. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone and feeling the familiar cold satisfaction of a trap snapping shut. The parking garage smelled like motor oil and desperation. I arrived early, choosing a spot on the third level where I could see all approaches while staying hidden behind a concrete pillar. The location was perfect for what Bigsby probably had in mind. Isolated, poorly lit, and full of blind spots where unpleasant conversations could happen without witnesses. He showed up 20 minutes late, driving a black BMW that screamed midlife crisis. Even from a distance, I could see his hands shaking as he parked and stepped out. The past week had aged him a decade, turning his silver hair gray and adding deep lines around his eyes. Lang, he called softly, his voice echoing off concrete walls. I know you're here. I emerged from the shadows, noting how he flinched when I appeared. The powerful chairman, who'd intimidated faculty members for years now, looked like exactly what he was, a cornered animal desperate to escape the trap he'd built for himself. You wanted to talk, I said. Talk. He glanced around nervously as if expecting cameras or recording devices. Not here. Too exposed. Get in my car. I'm comfortable where I am. Derek, please. What I'm about to propose could benefit both of us enormously. I stayed silent, letting him sweat while calculating the angles. Bigsby was going to offer me money, a lot of it, in exchange for making the evidence disappear. It was the kind of crude solution that had probably worked for him hundreds of times before. 500,000, he said finally. Cash, untraceable, delivered within 48 hours. All you have to do is destroy whatever recordings you have and convince your student accomplice to do the same. Student accomplice? Don't insult my intelligence. Miguel Santos has been your spy from the beginning. Bright kid, impressive technical skills, but sloppy about covering his digital tracks. Bigsby's smile was ugly. Did you really think I wouldn't figure out who was feeding you information? A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know about the additional recordings hidden in my office, or the financial documents someone downloaded from our server last Tuesday night. He stepped closer, and I caught the smell of whiskey on his breath. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take my money and make this go away, or very bad things are going to happen to people you care about. Such as Miguel Santos, for starters. Amazing how often scholarship students develop substance misuse problems. White powder is particularly common, I'm told. Amazing how it can just appear in dormitory rooms during routine inspections. The threat was delivered with casual malice. The tone of a man who destroyed lives so often, it had become routine. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. And if I refuse? Then your young friend gets expelled and arrested. Your wife faces federal charges that could put her in prison for 20 years, and you lose everything you've worked for in a very public and humiliating way. He spread his hands, like a reasonable man making a reasonable offer. Or you take the money, disappear quietly, and everyone moves on with their lives. I pretended to consider his proposal, letting the silence stretch until he started shifting nervously. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm and level. Counterproposal: you resign immediately, forfeit your pension, and cooperate fully with the federal investigation. In exchange, I'll make sure the prosecutors know you were helpful. His face flushed red. You arrogant little crap. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I've been protecting this institution since before you learned to tie your shoes. I have connections in the state government, the federal education department, law enforcement agencies you've never heard of. Had connections, I corrected. Past tense. Amazing how quickly powerful friends disappear when the scandal gets too big to contain. Bigsby's hand moved toward his jacket pocket and I tensed, ready to run or fight, but instead of a weapon, he pulled out his phone. One call, he said, finger hovering over the screen. One call, and Miguel Santos becomes another tragic statistic. Overdose, life-ending, accident, Take your pick. That's when I stopped pretending to be the old Derek Lang, the passive administrator who solved problems through committees and procedures. That's when the new version fully emerged, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. Make the call, I said. He hesitated, probably expecting me to cave immediately. What? Make the call. Do it right now in front of me. Show me exactly who you really are. Derek, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a predator who's been hiding behind academic respectability for decades. You've destroyed careers, silenced victims, and corrupted everything you've touched. And now you're threatening to eliminate a kid because your protection racket is falling apart. I pulled out my own phone, holding it up so he could see the screen. But here's what you don't understand. This conversation is being recorded and live-streamed to a private server. Everything you've said, every threat you've made, every admission of guilt, it's all documented and automatically backed up to multiple locations. His face went pale. You're bluffing. Miguel taught me a few things about digital security. Amazing kid. Brilliant future ahead of him, assuming he survives your tender mercies. I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. So, go ahead, make your call. Show the world exactly what kind of monster you are. Bigsby's hand began to shake. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering on the concrete floor. That's when I moved. The punch landed perfectly, connecting with his solar plexus and dropping him to his knees. Years of administrative frustration and suppressed rage flowed through my fist, and I felt his breath leave him in a whoosh of pain and surprise. That's for Miguel, I said, standing over him as he gasped for air. He tried to speak, probably to threaten or plead, but I wasn't done. The second punch caught him across the jaw, splitting his lip and sending blood spattering across the garage floor. That's for every student you silenced. The third punch broke his nose with a wet crunch that echoed off the concrete walls. He fell backward, blood streaming down his face, moaning like a wounded animal. And that's for my wife, for turning her into someone I don't recognize, for making her choose between her career and her soul. I stood there breathing hard, looking down at the pathetic figure he'd become. The powerful chairman who'd terrorized faculty members for years was now just a broken old man bleeding on a parking garage floor. Here's what happens next, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You're going to drive yourself to the nearest emergency room and tell them you fell down some stairs. Tomorrow morning, you're going to submit your resignation and announce your full cooperation with the federal investigation. You're going to forfeit your pension, liquidate your assets, and spend whatever years you have left making amends to the people you've hurt. He tried to sit up, spitting blood. And if I don't? Then Miguel releases everything we have to every news outlet in the country. Financial records, recorded conversations, video evidence, victim testimonies, all of it. Your wife's consulting company, your board connections, your hidden accounts, everything goes public, and you spend your golden years in federal prison. I picked up his phone and handed it to him. Your choice, graceful exit or complete destruction. But either way, your days of hurting people are over. As I walked away, leaving him bleeding in the shadows, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. The old Derek would have felt guilty about the violence, would have called an ambulance, and probably apologized. But the new Derek understood that some people only responded to the language they'd spent their lives speaking: power, fear, pain. Now, they'd finally understand what it felt like to be on the receiving end. Bigsby resigned the next morning via email, citing health concerns and announcing his intention to cooperate fully with ongoing investigations. By afternoon, he was on a plane to Switzerland, probably hoping to access hidden accounts before federal agents could freeze them. But Miguel and I had been 3 steps ahead for weeks. Every transaction, every hidden asset, every attempt to move money offshore had been documented and reported to the appropriate authorities. Bigsby's Swiss accounts were already frozen, his wife's consulting company under federal investigation, and his network of corruption exposed to the harsh light of justice. Jenna called me that evening, her voice hollow with despair. Walter's gone, she said. Just vanished. The FBI came to his house this morning and found it empty. His wife says she hasn't heard from him in 2 days. Sounds like a guilty man running from consequences. Derek, they're saying I was part of a criminal conspiracy. that I helped launder money and cover up sexual attacks. Her voice cracked. They want me to testify against Walter in exchange for a reduced sentence. Will you? Long pause. I don't know. I can't think straight anymore. Everything's falling apart so fast. Maybe you should have thought about that before you chose to sleep with your student and change his grades. It wasn't that simple. You don't understand the pressure I was under, the threats Walter made. I understand perfectly. You made choices, Jenna. Bad choices that hurt people. Now you get to live with the consequences. She started crying again, the same ugly sobs that had once moved me to comfort her. Now they just sounded like self-pity. I need you, she whispered. Whatever you think of me, whatever I've done, I need you right now. Please don't abandon me. You abandoned us 13 years ago, I said. You just forgot to mention it. I hung up and blocked her number. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no happily ever after redemption arc. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal, and some people revealed their true nature too clearly to ever be trusted again. 3 days later, Miguel knocked on my office door with news that made everything worthwhile. Toby's talking, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. His lawyer worked out a plea deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. What's he saying? Everything. The grade changes, the covered-up attacks, the money his father paid to make problems disappear. But here's the interesting part. He's also talking about other faculty members who were part of the system. Miguel slid a folder across my desk. Inside were transcripts of Toby's confession, documenting a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Jenna and Bigsby. Professors who'd accepted bribes, administrators who'd destroyed evidence, board members who'd voted to protect donors in exchange for personal favors. How many people are we talking about? 17 faculty members, 6 administrators, and 4 board members, plus assorted support staff who helped falsify records. Miguel's smile was sharp with satisfaction. The whole thing's coming down. I read through the transcripts, marveling at the scope of institutional rot that had been festering beneath Millbrook's prestigious facade. Jenna hadn't been an innocent victim corrupted by circumstances. She'd been a willing participant in a system that prioritized money over morality at every level. There's something else, Miguel said. The feds want to interview you next week. They think you might have insights into the administrative side of the conspiracy. What did you tell them? That you were completely unaware of what was happening. Just a dedicated employee who stumbled onto evidence of wrongdoing and did the right thing by reporting it. He paused. That is the story we're sticking with, right? I met his eyes, seeing the intelligence and cunning that had made our partnership so effective. Miguel understood that sometimes justice required creative interpretations of truth. That's exactly what happened, I confirmed. A concerned administrator discovered evidence of corruption and took appropriate action to protect the institution's integrity. The federal interviews went smoothly. I played the role of shocked husband and dedicated employee to perfection, providing just enough information to be helpful while maintaining plausible deniability about my more active role in exposing the conspiracy. The investigators seemed satisfied with my cooperation, especially when I provided them with additional evidence I'd discovered during routine administrative duties. Financial records, email chains, recorded conversations, all of it presented as the diligent work of someone trying to understand the scope of the problem. 2 weeks later, Jenna was arrested at her sister's house, charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The news footage showed her in handcuffs, looking haggard and broken as federal agents led her to a waiting car. I watched it from my office, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. The woman who'd shared my bed for 13 years was now just another criminal facing the consequences of her choices. The media coverage was extensive, but favorable to me. Administrator uncovers massive college corruption, read the headline in the Daily Herald, accompanied by a photo of me looking appropriately serious outside the federal courthouse. Inside the article, I was portrayed as a whistleblower hero who'd risked his career to expose institutional corruption. The betrayed husband who'd put duty above personal loyalty, choosing justice over family ties. It was a beautiful narrative, and almost entirely false. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, interim president of Millbrook College, appointed by a grateful board of trustees who credited me with saving the institution from complete collapse. The view from the president's suite was spectacular, overlooking the quad where students now attended classes without fear of predatory professors or corrupt administrators, The transformation had been remarkable. 17 faculty members resigned or were terminated. 6 administrators faced federal charges. 4 board members stepped down in disgrace. The entire English department was restructured, with new leadership and strict oversight protocols. Enrollment had initially dropped as news of the scandal spread, but applications for the following semester were already rebounding. Parents and students appreciated the new transparency, the zero-tolerance policies for misconduct, and the cultural shift toward actual academic integrity. I'd become something of a celebrity in higher education circles, invited to speak at conferences about institutional reform and ethical leadership. The man who'd saved Millbrook College from itself, who'd chosen principle over personal comfort. If only they knew the truth. Miguel knocked on my door that afternoon, carrying a laptop and wearing the satisfied expression of someone about to deliver good news. "Final update on our friends," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Thought you'd want to hear how everything turned out." He opened the laptop and pulled up a news article from that morning. Walter Bigsby was arrested in Geneva yesterday. Swiss authorities found him in a hotel room with a suitcase full of cash and false identity documents. He's being extradited to face federal charges. The mugshot showed a broken man, aged far beyond his years, and hollow-eyed with despair. The powerful chairman who'd terrorized faculty members for decades was now just another white-collar criminal facing decades in prison. What about the others? Toby got 18 months in federal prison plus 5 years probation. His father's company is under investigation for tax evasion and bribery. The family fortune is pretty much gone. Miguel scrolled to another article. 3 professors pled guilty to conspiracy charges. 2 administrators are going to trial next month. The whole network is dismantled. And Jenna? Miguel's expression grew more serious. That's the complicated one. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal, 5 years in federal prison in exchange for full cooperation. She testified against Bigsby and the others, provided financial records, admitted to everything. He pulled up a video clip from a local news broadcast. Jenna appeared on screen, walking up the courthouse steps flanked by lawyers and federal marshals. She looked thin and fragile, her hair shorter and graying at the temples. "The sentencing hearing is next week," Miguel continued. "Word is she's been getting death threats from victims' families. Had to be moved to a safe house after someone threw a brick through her sister's window." I watched the footage without emotion, studying the face of the woman who'd once shared my dreams and my bed. She looked like a stranger now, hollowed out by guilt and consequence. Any word on where she'll serve her time? Federal minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. White-collar criminals, mostly. She'll probably be out in 3 years with good behavior. Miguel closed the laptop and studied my face. "You feel anything for her after everything that's happened?" I considered the question carefully. Did I feel anything for the broken woman who'd once been my wife? Sympathy for her fall from grace? Regret for the role I'd played in her destruction? "No," I said finally. "She made her choices. Now she's living with them." "And you? Any regrets about how we handled things?" I looked around my new office with its mahogany desk and leather-bound books, its panoramic view of a campus finally free from corruption. In 6 months, I'd gone from invisible administrator to institutional savior, from cuckolded husband to respected leader. None whatsoever. Miguel smiled and stood to leave. "Good. Because I've been thinking about our next project." "Next project?" "Other colleges, other corruption networks. Amazing how much money people will pay for the kind of cleanup service we provided here." His grin was sharp with possibility. "Interested in expanding our operation?" I considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds before shaking my head. "I think I'll stick to legitimate institutional reform from now on." "Your loss. But if you change your mind, you know how to reach me." After he left, I returned to the financial reports spread across my desk. Millbrook's endowment had grown significantly over the past 6 months, boosted by donations from alumni impressed by our commitment to transparency and reform. The irony wasn't lost on me. By destroying the corrupt system that had protected my wife's affair, I'd accidentally become the poster child for academic integrity. The man who'd committed carefully orchestrated character assassination was now being celebrated as a moral exemplar. But the greatest irony was simpler than that. In trying to make myself visible, I'd become more invisible than ever. Everyone saw Derek Lang, the hero, the whistleblower, the institutional savior. No one saw the cold, calculating man who'd methodically destroyed his wife's life for the simple crime of making him feel small. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. My secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Lang, there's a call for you on line 2. Says it's personal." I picked up the phone, expecting another journalist or conference organizer. Instead, I heard Jenna's voice, thin and desperate. "Derek, please don't hang up." I should have ended the call immediately and blocked this number too. But curiosity won, just as it had with Miguel's original USB stick. "What do you want, Jenna?" I needed to hear your voice, to try to understand how we got here. You got here by sleeping with your student and taking bribes. I got here by doing my job. Is that really what you believe? That you're just an innocent victim in all this? Her voice carried a note I hadn't heard before. Not desperation or self-pity, but something harder. Something that sounded almost like clarity. "I know what you did," she continued. "The recordings, the anonymous tips, the perfectly timed revelations. You didn't just discover corruption. You orchestrated my destruction." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. "The thing is, I'm not even angry anymore. What you did to me, it's probably what I deserved. But the way you did it, Derek, the cold calculation, the complete absence of mercy, it scares me." "Good. Do you know what the other inmates call me?" "The professor. Like it's a joke, like everything I worked for my entire career was meaningless." Her voice cracked slightly. "But you know what the guards call you? The ones who follow the news? They call you the saint, the hero who saved academia from people like me. People need heroes and villains. Everyone needs someone to blame, someone to hate. You gave them that in me and took the credit for cleaning up the mess." She paused. "You're smarter than I ever gave you credit for. I'm smarter than anyone gave me credit for." "Yes, you are. And that's what scares me. Because this isn't over, is it? This need to prove you're not invisible, to show everyone how clever you really are. You've gotten a taste of power now, and people like you never stop hungry." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. I'd spent my entire career in the shadows, watching other people get credit for work I'd done, recognition I'd earned. Now that I'd stepped into the light, the thought of returning to obscurity was unbearable. "Some people deserve what happens to them," I said finally. "And some people deserve what they become." Her voice was steady now, almost philosophical. "Goodbye, Derek. I hope you're happy with what you've built. But more than that, I hope you can live with who you've become." The line went dead, leaving me alone in my mahogany-paneled office with its spectacular view and its carefully curated image of moral authority. The news arrived on a Thursday morning 6 weeks later, delivered by a nervous-looking assistant who clearly didn't want to be the messenger. "Mr. Lang, I'm sorry to inform you that there's been an incident involving Jenna Lang." The newspaper clipping was brief. "Former professor dies in prison incident." The article described a fight in the dining hall, an altercation with another inmate that had escalated quickly. Jenna had fallen, striking her head on a concrete table. She died 3 hours later in the prison medical facility. I read the article twice, waiting for some emotional response that never came. No grief, no regret, no sense of loss. Just a cold satisfaction that the last loose thread had been tied off. "Sir?" The assistant was still standing there, uncertain how to proceed. Is there anything you need to do?" "Arrangements or—" "Her sister can handle it," I said, handing back the clipping. "Send flowers, something appropriate." The funeral was small and private, held in a dingy chapel across town. I arrived late and sat in the back, watching Jenna's sister and a handful of former colleagues say goodbye to the woman who'd once been my wife. The service was mercifully brief. No one mentioned her academic achievements or her contributions to literature. Instead, they focused on her final months, her cooperation with investigators, her apparent remorse for the harm she'd caused. It was a sanitized version of her story, edited for public consumption and stripped of complexity. The real Jenna, brilliant, ambitious, morally flexible, and ultimately self-destructive, was buried beneath layers of convenient narrative. Just like the real Derek Lang was buried beneath a mythology of the righteous administrator who'd saved his institution from corruption. After the service, I stood outside the chapel watching mourners file past the hearse. Most avoided eye contact, probably unsure how to interact with the grieving husband who'd also been the whistleblower responsible for his wife's downfall. But one figure approached me directly. Professor Kira Solis from the philosophy department, one of the few faculty members who'd emerged from the scandal with her reputation intact. "Derek," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She studied my face with the intensity of someone trained to examine moral questions. "Can I ask you something?" "Hypothetically?" "Of course. If someone knew that their actions would lead to another person's destruction, complete, total destruction, but those actions were technically legal and arguably justified, would that person bear moral responsibility for the outcome?" It was the kind of abstract, ethical question that philosophy professors loved, dressed up as intellectual curiosity, but clearly directed at me personally. That would depend," I replied carefully, "on whether the destruction was deserved. And who gets to make that determination? The person with the power to do so." Kira nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "That's a very honest answer, and a very frightening one." She walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the parking lot with the weight of her unspoken accusation. That evening, I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd first watched Miguel's video, and reviewed the past year's accomplishments. Millbrook College was stronger than ever, with record enrollment and a reputation for integrity that attracted top-tier faculty and students. I'd been invited to serve on 3 national education committees and had received offers from larger universities interested in my expertise in institutional reform. My transformation from invisible administrator to recognized leader was complete. But Kira's question lingered. Who gets to determine whether destruction is deserved? The answer, I realized, was simple. Whoever had the intelligence to see through the lies, the patience to gather evidence, and the ruthlessness to use both effectively. For 13 years, I'd watched my wife treat me like furniture. Present but unimportant, functional but forgettable. She'd assumed I was too passive to fight back, too conventional to play by her rules. She'd been wrong about everything except one thing. I was invisible. But invisibility, I'd discovered, was the ultimate weapon. No one suspected the quiet administrator of orchestrating complex revenge plots. No one imagined that the betrayed husband might be more dangerous than the corrupt professor or predatory chairman. My phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel. New opportunity, small liberal arts school in Vermont. Faculty embezzlement and admissions fraud. Interested? I stared at the message for several minutes, feeling the familiar hunger for justice, or what I'd learned to call justice. Another corrupt institution, another chance to prove my worth by tearing down the comfortable lies that protected the guilty. But Jenna's final words echoed in my mind. People like you never stop hungry. She'd been right about that too. The taste of power was addictive, and the satisfaction of destroying my enemies had awakened something dark and insatiable. I could feel it growing inside me, demanding new targets and greater challenges. I deleted Miguel's message without responding and poured myself a drink. Through my study window, I could see the lights of Millbrook College, the institution I'd saved from corruption and shaped in my own image. Tomorrow, I'd return to my role as the heroic president, the moral exemplar who'd chosen justice over personal loyalty. I'd give speeches about institutional integrity and the importance of holding powerful people accountable for their actions. And somewhere in the audience would be other invisible people, other overlooked spouses and undervalued employees, watching and learning and perhaps beginning to understand that revenge was just another word for justice when it was properly planned and executed. The phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from the Chronicle of Higher Education wanting to interview me about my book deal, a memoir about reforming corrupt institutions and the personal cost of choosing principle over loyalty. Mr. Lang, your story has inspired educators across the country. What advice would you give to others who discover corruption in their institutions? I settled back in my chair, already crafting the perfect response. Humble, but confident. Principled, but pragmatic. Document everything, I said. Be patient. And remember that sometimes the only way to save an institution is to destroy the people who are destroying it from within. The reporter scribbled notes enthusiastically, probably already planning the headline. academic hero shares wisdom on institutional reform. After the interview ended, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the comfortable silence of a house that no longer echoed with lies and false promises. The old Derek Lang had died in this room, eliminated by a USB stick and 13 years of accumulated betrayals. The new Derek Lang had been born from that death, colder, smarter, infinitely more dangerous. Invisible no longer, but still underestimated by those who mistook quiet confidence for moral weakness. Outside, snow began to fall on the campus I now controlled, covering the quad where students studied and laughed and planned their futures. They were safer now, protected by the systems I'd put in place and the culture of accountability I'd fostered. But they were also living in the domain of a man who'd learned that justice and revenge were often indistinguishable, and that the most dangerous people were those who convinced themselves they were righteous. I raised my glass to the falling snow and smiled. Jenna was dead, Bigsby was in prison, and I was president of one of the most respected colleges in New England. The invisible man had finally learned to be seen.